What the city is talking about. This is Montreal Now on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
That is James Mennie over at the Montreal Gazette. And Jim, we're on Kamala watch right now. Yeah. So as soon as she begins her speech, we're going to hear a concession speech from her coming up literally any minute. We'll come back. We'll play it. It might be a minute or so delayed, but you will hear it in its entirety. So let's begin with that. About last night, Jim, what'd you think?
Well, first of all, I mean, I will, I guess, to a certain extent, proudly admit that I was dead wrong about this.
Yeah.
I had said that I really had a feeling there was going to be a groundswell of support that perhaps the polls weren't indicating for Ms. Harris. That wasn't there. In fact, I just saw the most astounding little nugget of news for the first time, perhaps ever. Because in the States, you're registered voters or you're registered Republicans or Democrats or independents. For the first time, apparently ever, independent voters outnumbered the number of Democrats who voted in the election yesterday. Most of them did vote for Kamala Harris. However, that still bumped up Trump's numbers, and he had a very solid base. Listen, I think I was guilty of perhaps thinking a little too much with my head rather than my heart, and saying that, for sure, it can't be unique to Canada that a woman's right to choose, that the threat that is posed by Donald Trump and his party would have galvanized people. That didn't happen. And what I've spent a lot of today looking at is never mind. We know who Donald Trump is. We know what he is. There is absolutely no denying that. And yet 72 million Americans voted for him. And the fact that Kamala Harris is not having a press conference a la Trump, as far as we know, saying the fix was in and I'm going to be challenging these results, suggests that, well, someone was asleep at the switch. There is a lot of finger pointing. I don't know if you've seen it yet online, but the Democrats, the old cliche, Democrats in disarray. Democrats are pretty well devastated. And I don't think it's overstating the case to say that whereas the Republican Party no longer exists, it's basically a Trump cult. The Democrats he didn't just beat the Democrats last night. He broke them over his knee. So it's great to hear from Kamala Harris. It'll be great to hear from the increasingly irrelevant Nancy Pelosi. It'll be great to hear from Barack Obama if you ever do. I really want to hear from George Clooney, frankly, Aaron. You were on vacation when this whole thing came down. George Clooney, of course, made headlines because I'm suspecting he had his publicist write an op-ed piece suggesting that Joe Biden stepped down for the good of the party. Maybe he's fled to his villa at Lac Como in Italy. He'll lead a government in exile. But the guy, I couldn't help but thinking, it's a terrible thing to say, I couldn't help but thinking that if anybody was chuckling last night, apart from Donald Trump, it was Joe Biden. Because when you look at these numbers for the independents, when you look at the smarminess of how he got shivved, and I'm not a Monday morning quarterback. People who remember, you were on vacation when all this happened, but I remember I used the verb shivved by his own party to get him out of the way because of that one bad debate performance. But above and beyond those personalities, because that's all irrelevant now, the question is, how did 72 million people wind up endorsing what we saw of Donald Trump over this campaign? And there is absolutely no explanation for it other than, they don't care. A lot of people are saying that the big mistake made by the Democrats in this particular campaign was that they were going after, they're trying to woo disaffected Republicans, suburban dwellers. And in fact, their base of support, believe it or not, is what you perceive Donald Trump to be, which is non-college educated working class voters. They just gave him the cold shoulder, apparently, and those votes went to Donald Trump. We're not talking about the cracker vote there, Aaron. You see that map. I'm sure you've been looking at it all day. Those so-called blue wall states are red, and they're not kind of red. They're red. I mean, this is for real stuff. And we have to ask ourselves the question, it isn't so much a matter of Donald Trump. I think it's more of a matter of how we misread the United States and the people who live there, and what does this mean for us down the road. I don't think there is a kind of nefarious, evil kind of Dr. Sinister plan behind all this, but what really scares the hell out of me is the growing amount of just general indifference on the part of the United States, which basically says, you know what, keep my taxes down, don't disrupt my life, and I totally don't care what you do, what you say, or more importantly, who you do it to. And that, I think, is going to make life very, very difficult for a lot of Americans and perhaps even for a lot of Republicans down the road.
So, I mean, when you talk about, and I know we're sort of laser focused on the presidency, but as we know by now, this is devastating for the party, right? You lose the Senate, you lose the House, you apparently lose the popular vote, something that hasn't happened in 20 years. You mentioned people like Nancy Pelosi. I mean, I think this sends a pretty clear message, Jim, that they need a clean house and they need to do it soon.
Oh, they have to do it soon because don't forget, it is not overstating the case because I know the Americans love to say, we have all these checks and balances in our system. Donald Trump has absolute power. The only thing you forgot to mention was the fact that he's packed the Supreme Court. He can quite literally do whatever he wants for the next 4 years. And the other, and I've mentioned this on air, you may be hearing about it more down the road. If it happens that, in 6 months' time, Donald Trump realizes, the demands of the presidency are far too much for me. I'm going to go to a very well-deserved and very profitable retirement. And yes, I'm going to hand the country to J.D. Vance. So a lot of people perceive as the personal accoutrement of a South African billionaire named Peter Thiel. Then you're going to see some very interesting things happen right now. But the chiefs of staff, Aaron, the military, retired or active, who turned around and said Donald Trump is a dictator, what happens to them? And indeed, will Donald Trump be able to follow through on some of his more outrageous threats? Can he turn around, snap his fingers, and turn the American military into his personal Praetorian Guard? I don't think so. And I think to a certain extent, once the euphoria and the shock of this victory wears off, even with the MAGA party, are you going to see voices say, dial it back, calm down? Because people right now are very fragile. There are some people out there who think the entire world's been turned upside down. And if you go too far too fast, you may get a reaction that you weren't expecting. I think that, too, is entirely possible. I hope it doesn't happen, but it's entirely possible. So, yes, by all means, be shocked. And yes, by all means, mourn a kind of United States that I certainly thought existed, but now we realize has been dead, perhaps dead for quite some time. But understand, this is not the work of one man. Tens of millions of Americans voted in favor of this. Does that make them all misogynist? Does it make them all racist? Does it make them all sexual predators? No. But I think and that's the scary part of the question, Aaron. What was it they saw in Donald Trump that they didn't see in Kamala Harris? And imagine if it is something as mundane as, there'll be a tax break, or he's going to make I know he didn't say anything specific, but he's going to make the economy go better. Listen, greater things in history have turned on far, far less, and yet here we are having a talk about an event that, quite frankly, last night I thought was not going to happen.
I wonder too, Jim, immigration obviously is a key. That's a lot of what got talked about during, even though it's pointing a finger at Kamala Harris because she was the border czar and didn't do anything until right at the end. This has implications here, and it didn't take very long. These questions came up today in the National Assembly with respect to, Trump's in power. We all remember what happened with Roxham Road. Are we concerned about that? There's a reason to be concerned, is there not?
Well, absolutely. And I saw one observer say it's time for Canada to get its act together now. Don't sit there and tweet. Don't sit there and stare at the ceiling wondering what's going to happen. Get ready now, because there probably will be not tens of thousands, but millions of people who are going to flee that country. They know the northern border is far more porous than, and no one's going to actually flee to Mexico. But the bottom line is you will probably see a lot of people moving north. A lot of people who are afraid that they will be deported en masse by Donald Trump, knowing that once, as I just mentioned, he can do whatever he wants. He can literally send out people to round up, perceived illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants and throw them out of the country, and there's absolutely nothing to stop him. So, it's time for Justin Trudeau to put down his phone and start looking at the border. And it's also time for François Legault to stop looking in the mirror and fancying himself the protector of the French nation, and actually pick up the phone and call Ottawa and say, what do we do here? Because we know we're both going to get screwed over if we don't take action, if we don't become proactive and take action on this before it happens.
You know, I will ask, because we're going to ask our listeners as well. I did this after 2:00. Everyone gets to play analyst today, and I'm just thinking of what you said. You know, if you boil this down, and there'll be obviously a lot of opinions over the next couple of days as to what the Democrats did wrong, what Kamala Harris did wrong. Because as I said, you know, this doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Kamala Harris didn't just walk out and say, I'm going to talk about this today. There are people who form, you know, a campaign who sort of suggest do this, do that, talk about this, and clearly they were wrong. Their message did not resonate. And I think if you had to boil it down to one thing, it could be the idea, right? Where you just, and they said this in the Trump campaign, I think repeatedly, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Boom. Yeah. Only question, only answer you need to know, and it's an answer that she could never really come up with.
Well, no, and it's certainly not economically. And as I speak to you, Aaron, of course, and maybe you're doing the same thing, I'm looking at that results map. I'm looking at not the Electoral College, but indeed the House of Representative results. And it looks like, once again, they are going to hit that trifecta. And nearly the entire map is red. Yes, the right and left-hand sides with the major population centers are blue. But guess what? As we saw, that doesn't count. There's a huge space in the middle. Not that heavily populated, but still with tens of millions of people who said no. Donald Trump, I trust Donald Trump more than Kamala Harris with the next 4 years of my life.
That's what it boils down to. Jim, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Matt.